September 21st, 1945. Camp Deming, New Mexico. The low hum of a projector filled the dimly lit recreation hall as 500 German prisoners of war laughed at the antics of cowboys on the silver screen. But Unteroffizier Gayorg Gertner's eyes were elsewhere, fixed on the clock above the hall entrance. Each tick brought him closer to 8:47 p.m., the precise moment the westbound freight train would slow around the curve just beyond the camp's perimeter fence. For 3 painstaking weeks, he had memorized the schedule with military precision, calculating every second as if planning an offensive rather than an escape. Around him, fellow prisoners were lost in the illusions of Hollywood. Gunfights erupted on screen, horses thundered across deserts, and laughter rang through the hall, a sound almost obscene to the tension coiling in Gertner's chest. Unlike the majority of the 425,871 Axis POWs interned in America, most of whom would remain quietly behind barbed wire until repatriation, Gertner intended to do what only 2,221 others had dared: escape. But he was not running toward glory, patriotism, or even the pull of home. He was running from a reality far darker than captivity itself. Folded carefully in his pocket was a letter from the International Red Cross, 6 weeks old, yet burned into his memory. His hometown of Schwidnitz, Lower Silesia, no longer existed in the world he had known. Transferred from German to Polish administration, its German inhabitants faced expulsion, imprisonment, or worse. The maps on the walls of the camp might still have labeled the town as German, but Gertner knew that reality had changed. To prisoners whose homes now lay behind the encroaching Iron Curtain, America was not merely impressive, it was salvation. The abundant land, the limitless food, the possibility of life untouched by totalitarian rule. For men like Gertner, returning home equated to volunteering for death. The hall's gunfire echoed again, a convenient cover. Gertner rose quietly, moving with the careful fluidity of a soldier on reconnaissance. He slipped past the rows of laughing prisoners, avoiding the watchful eyes of the few guards distracted by the film. Each step was measured, calculated. Beneath 2 perimeter gates, he crouched, waiting for the whistle that would signal the train's approach. 90 seconds, 200 yards, 1 shot at freedom. It was a mission whose stakes dwarfed any he had faced on the battlefields of Africa. The desert night was cool, almost deceptive, masking the arid harshness that daylight would reveal. The train's distant whistle pierced the quiet, a clarion call that he had been anticipating for weeks. With the speed of a man trained for survival, he sprinted, heart pounding like a drum in his ears across the scrubland. The rails gleamed faintly under the moon, a silver lifeline to a future he could barely imagine. As he climbed the ladder of a moving boxcar, he felt the familiar rush of fear and exhilaration that had driven him through countless battles. Yet this time, the enemy was not an army, but the inexorable sweep of history itself. To understand this desperate flight, one must rewind 25 years to December 18, 1920, when Gertner was born in Schwidnitz. Nestled in the shadow of the Sudeten Mountains, the town was a tapestry of cobbled streets, textile mills, and prosperous breweries. His father managed a local brewery, providing the family with comfort and stability, a middle-class life that would later seem almost unattainable. Gayorg was bright, introspective, and possessed a linguistic gift that allowed him to master English and French while still a schoolboy, a skill that would serve him better than any weapons training in the years to come. As the 1930s unfolded, nationalist fervor gripped Germany. When war erupted in September 1939, 19-year-old Gertner enlisted in the Wehrmacht, eager to restore a nation he had been taught to revere. Assigned to the 10th Panzer Division, he experienced the rapid victories over France in 1940, racing through the Ardennes and reaching the English Channel in 6 weeks. The triumphs reinforced everything Nazi propaganda had taught him: German invincibility, Allied weakness, and the righteousness of the cause. But beneath the surface of these early victories, a subtle tension brewed, a sense that the story told by officers and newspapers might not fully align with the realities on the ground. By February 1941, he was shipped to Tripoli, Libya, joining Rommel's newly formed Deutsches Afrika Korps. The desert was a crucible that would shatter illusions. Soldiers rationed water to a single liter per day under the relentless sun, while British supply depots offered tinned peaches, chocolate, cigarettes, and rum, the enemy's material advantage impossible to ignore. The harsh mathematics of desert warfare exposed German vulnerability. A Tiger tank, for instance, consumed 600 liters of fuel to travel 100 kilometers, while entire months of allocation could scarcely sustain maneuver for even a single division. For Gertner, this was not just a lesson in logistics, it was a psychological revelation. The Afrika Korps, brilliant as it was tactically, relied on improvisation and sheer determination more than any sustainable supply chain. Desert warfare demanded ingenuity, yet it also revealed the limits of human endurance. Soldiers joked bitterly that Rommel's genius lay in winning battles with equipment held together by wire and willpower. Gertner's rise to sergeant in the 164th Light Africa Division placed him at the forefront of reconnaissance missions that probed British lines, a role that demanded courage, intelligence, and the constant awareness that death could strike from any direction. And yet amid the hardships, a shadow of inevitability crept over him. As Allied forces amassed in Tunisia, cutting off retreat and resources, Gertner would witness the collapse of the African front, the surrender of thousands, and the stark contrast between the mechanized, abundant might of the United States and the precarious existence of his homeland. But none of that could compare to the tension now crouched beneath the New Mexico desert sky as he waited for a freight train that represented not merely escape, but the chance to reinvent his entire life. Gertner's childhood in Schwidnitz was marked by the rhythm of a prosperous small town. The cobblestone streets echoed with the clatter of horse-drawn carts and the hum of textile looms, while the scent of brewing beer wafted from his father's modest brewery. His upbringing was comfortable yet disciplined. The values instilled by his parents, order, diligence, and respect for authority, would later make him a capable soldier, but also leave him unprepared for the moral chaos of war. Even as a child, Gayorg showed an aptitude for languages, absorbing English and French with ease, skills that would become crucial during his captivity in America. By 1939, the clouds of war darkened Europe. 19 years old and swept up by nationalist fervor, Gertner enlisted in the Wehrmacht. The German military, confident from previous campaigns, promised glory, discipline, and the restoration of a nation humiliated by Versailles. Assigned to the 10th Panzer Division, he experienced the lightning-fast victories over France in 1940. Within 6 weeks, German troops had swept through the Ardennes and reached the English Channel, a feat celebrated in Nazi propaganda as proof of Aryan superiority and German ingenuity. The early triumphs were intoxicating. Soldiers reveled in speed, coordination, and technological innovation. Tanks rumbled across fields that had once seemed impassable, while air support struck with terrifying precision. For Gertner, each advance reinforced the lessons of obedience and efficiency drilled into him since boyhood. Yet beneath the exhilaration lay the first inklings of doubt. Even in victory, the human cost was evident: destruction, civilian displacement, and the quiet fear in the eyes of conquered townsfolk hinted at a complexity that propaganda never acknowledged. In February 1941, Gertner's trajectory shifted from the forests of France to the vast arid deserts of North Africa. He was shipped to Tripoli, Libya, to join Rommel's Deutsches Afrika Korps. Here, war shed its veneer of glory. The desert's relentless sun and merciless terrain became a test not just of strategy, but of survival. Soldiers survived on a single liter of water per day. Vehicles strained under unyielding sands. Supply lines were fragile, and the logistics of maintaining a modern army in such an environment were brutal. Despite these hardships, the Corps had moments of triumph. British supply depots yielded chocolate, rum, and cigarettes, luxuries that revealed the disparity between the resource-rich Allies and the struggling German forces. Yet every success was tempered by the unforgiving desert and the awareness that each day could be the last. Gertner, now a sergeant leading reconnaissance missions, learned the duality of desert warfare, brilliance of tactics shadowed by scarcity, courage constantly threatened by logistical reality. In October 1942, the Battle of El Alamein brought this duality into sharp relief. Montgomery's forces unleashed an artillery barrage of 1,000 guns, firing 15,000 shells in the opening hours alone. German artillery, rationed to 10 shells per gun per day, could scarcely respond. Gertner's reconnaissance unit, tasked with probing enemy lines ahead of the main force, watched helplessly as Allied dominance in numbers and resources became painfully clear. Vehicles abandoned, equipment destroyed to prevent capture, and the Luftwaffe absent from the sky, all signs of a strategic collapse that no amount of skill could prevent. By January 1943, the Afrika Korps was compressed into a shrinking pocket in Tunisia. Operation Torch had brought American forces into the fray, and the Axis found itself surrounded, starving, and outnumbered. In May 1943, Gertner's war in Africa ended in an olive grove outside Tunis. His unit, once 120 strong, had dwindled to 17 men. Ammunition exhausted, fuel gone, hope almost extinguished, they raised a white undershirt to signal surrender. The British Eighth Army, almost embarrassed by their victory, offered cigarettes and chocolate to these hollowed men, a gesture that highlighted the stark contrast between human decency and the inhumanity of war. For Gertner, surrender was both relief and revelation. The efficiency of American camps astounded him. Within 48 hours, a tent city housing 30,000 prisoners had been erected, complete with field hospitals, kitchens, and sanitation facilities. Each prisoner was photographed, fingerprinted, and issued identification with machine-like precision. Yet the most profound shock was the food. Sea rations, often criticized by American soldiers, were a banquet to men who had survived months on hard biscuits and sardines. Canned beef, crackers, chocolate, coffee, and cigarettes, items discarded casually by the guards, represented not just abundance, but a glimpse of a world utterly unlike the war-ravaged Europe he had known. Gertner IS' first exposure to American logistics and industrial might came on the Liberty ship USS Samuel Huntington, which transported him and other prisoners across the Atlantic. Built in just 44 days as one of 2,710 identical vessels, the ship was a floating symbol of American industrial power. Fresh bread baked daily, powdered eggs that tasted real, and abundant coffee revealed the vast resources available to even ordinary Americans. Gertner's English, honed during childhood, earned him a role assisting in prisoner administration, a position granting him rare insights into the technological and organizational capabilities of the U.S. Navy, from radar equipment tracking ships beyond the horizon to medical facilities stocked with penicillin, a drug that German field hospitals had scarcely seen since 1941. Even the sailor's casual attitude toward wealth and waste struck him. Magazines discarded after a single reading, shoes tossed aside, and monthly wages gambled away revealed a nation in which material abundance was so vast that scarcity was almost unimaginable. Observing this, Gertner began to understand why Nazi propaganda had failed to suppress curiosity or admiration among prisoners. Here was a country that, while fighting a global war, maintained civilian comfort and industrial supremacy beyond comprehension. By the time the Samuel Huntington docked at Norfolk, Virginia, Gertner's perception of the world had irrevocably shifted. His war was over, but a new struggle was about to begin, not on the battlefield, but in the human heart, as he faced the stark choices of captivity, identity, and survival in a land that seemed both impossible and liberating. The train carrying Gertner and hundreds of fellow prisoners westward from Norfolk became more than a simple transfer. It was a moving classroom, an unintentional revelation of America's industrial and social might. Gone were the cramped, crowded conditions of German troop trains. Instead, they rode in genuine Pullman coaches, cushioned seats cradling their tired bodies, overhead luggage racks, electric fans circulating air, and dining cars serving hot meals on real plates with metal cutlery. The experience alone would have been extraordinary to any German officer, yet for men who had witnessed the destruction and deprivation of their homeland, it was almost surreal. As the train crossed Virginia's Tidewater region, Gertner pressed his face against the window, eyes absorbing a panorama. His mind struggled to reconcile with Nazi propaganda. Small towns blazed with electric lights long after dusk. Shop windows glowed with merchandise, and rail yards operated under floodlights that turned night into day. In Germany, blackout regulations had plunged cities into darkness since 1940. Here, light was abundant, almost reckless. Water and coal stations ran with mechanical efficiency unimaginable to European standards. Automated coal loaders filled tenders in 20 minutes, a task that required hours of manual labor back home. The train pushed west into Tennessee, passing landscapes transformed by the hands of industry. Near Kingsport, Gertner counted 147 coal cars in a single train, each loaded with 100 tons and pulled by massive locomotives. The Tennessee Eastman Chemical Complex stretched for 2 miles, distillation towers and cooling columns towering over the countryside, producing materials vital to both war and civilian life. Outside Louisville, synthetic rubber plants arose from empty fields, producing 800,000 tons annually, a feat German chemists could only dream of scaling. In comparison, Germany's peak production barely reached 120,000 tons. Every mile reinforced a reality Gertner struggled to grasp. America was not only fighting a global war, it was thriving while doing so. Crossing the Mississippi River at St. Louis, the prisoners saw grain elevators capable of storing enough wheat to feed Munich for 5 years. Rail yards stretched for 8 miles along the riverfront, freight trains carrying abundance on a scale that rendered European logistics almost trivial. The farmland of Missouri revealed mechanized efficiency. Combines, tractors, and irrigation systems transforming labor-intensive agriculture into a demonstration of productivity that dwarfed German capacities. Even ordinary families, farmers, workers, and laborers, enjoyed comfort, mobility, and access to goods Gertner's propaganda-fed upbringing had never allowed him to imagine. After 4 days of travel, the train arrived at Camp Hearn, Texas, on July 28, 1943. The camp sprawled across 840 acres, housing up to 4,800 prisoners in facilities that seemed palatial compared to Wehrmacht field accommodations. Barracks featured electricity, flush toilets, and hot showers, luxuries that German civilians might never see during the war. Each prisoner received 3,000 to 3,600 calories daily, triple the intake available to German civilians in 1943. Meat, vegetables, bread, milk, butter, and coffee arrived in quantities unimaginable. Kitchen crews discarded more food daily than entire German villages could consume in a week. Assigned to the camp's administrative section, Gertner was exposed to the machinery of American logistics. Shipments arrived weekly: 40,000 pounds of beef, 20,000 loaves of bread, 15,000 gallons of milk, and tons of fresh vegetables. Prisoners constructed amphitheaters for 30,000 spectators, sports complexes, swimming pools, and fountains from materials considered scrap by the Americans, a display of surplus that contrasted sharply with German wartime scarcity. By September 1943, labor shortages led the U.S. Army to employ prisoners in agriculture and industry. Gertner's crew worked on local cotton farms, traveling freely across the Texas countryside. Their first assignment was at Jim Morrison's 2,000-acre farm, where mechanical cotton pickers and tractors replaced dozens of manual laborers. Black and Mexican field hands, at the bottom of the American social hierarchy, ate meals that would have been feasts in Germany, wore sturdy boots and cotton clothing, and even owned radios or bicycles. A local foreman, Samuel Washington, remarked wryly, "This ain't prosperity, Sergeant. This is just regular times. You should have seen the 20s. Mechanized cotton gins processed in a single day what entire provinces of Germany could not. Rural electrification powered farms and industry, bringing light, energy, and efficiency to areas once reliant on manpower alone. Here, the ideological edifice of Nazi superiority faced its first real cracks in Gertner's mind, a society fighting a global war yet producing abundance, maintaining civil order, and respecting human dignity, even toward its enemies. The emotional impact of Camp Hearn intensified during Christmas 1943. 500,000 packages arrived from American churches, civic organizations, and families. Cigarettes, candy, razors, socks, and cards with heartfelt messages. Choirs of local housewives sang carols in German, while prisoners wept openly, overwhelmed by a generosity that transcended enemy lines. The Christmas feast was a revelation. Turkey, ham, potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie, luxuries unheard of in wartime Germany. Letters from home, written on scraps of paper, starkly contrasted with the richness of American gifts. These disparities struck a profound psychological chord. For Gertner, the journey from Norfolk to Texas was more than miles traveled. It was a journey through human possibility, revealing a nation whose prosperity, technological mastery, and social structures defied every lesson taught in Hitler's schools. Each day reinforced the paradox. Prisoners lived better in captivity than German civilians, yet the very experience planted seeds of admiration, envy, and reflection that would shape choices in the years to come. As 1944 unfolded, Camp Hearn became more than a prison. It became an unintentional university, a place where German soldiers encountered an America previously inconceivable. The U.S. Army, partnering with universities and technical institutions, offered correspondence courses, lectures, and vocational training to prisoners. Professors, many of whom were Jewish refugees who had fled Nazi persecution, taught without hatred or revenge. They instructed officers in American history, economics, constitutional law, and governance, revealing a society built on law, debate, and individual opportunity. Concepts alien to the rigid, propaganda-soaked worldview Gertner had grown up with. Professor Ernst Goldmitt, a refugee from Heidelberg, became an unlikely mentor to Gertner and his fellow prisoners. Goldmitt taught constitutional law to officers who had once sworn allegiance to Hitler. His absence of bitterness astonished the students, offering a perspective that contradicted everything the German officers had been taught. That democracy could coexist with morality, that enemies could be treated with dignity, and that learning was not a tool of indoctrination, but liberation. The camp library, stocked with 20,000 books in German and English, and subscriptions to newspapers such as the New York Times, Time, and Life, exposed prisoners to multiple perspectives on global events. The contrast with Nazi-controlled media was stark. Here, information was abundant, diverse, and openly debated. Vocational training complemented intellectual growth. Gertner enrolled in accounting and business courses, learning how corporations functioned, how capital markets operated, and how ordinary citizens could invest and prosper, knowledge denied to him under the Third Reich. American industry was not abstract theory, it was visible, tangible, and overwhelming. During summer 1944, Gertner's labor crew worked at a modest oil refinery outside Houston. The facility processed 100,000 barrels of crude daily, more than Germany's entire post-war Romanian oil output. 3 shifts operated around the clock, employing thousands, including women handling complex operations. Gertner saw firsthand the source of American mechanized warfare, a nation capable of sustaining vast armies while feeding, housing, and employing its civilian population. At the San Jacinto Ordnance Depot, prisoners unloaded shipments of artillery shells, each daily delivery exceeding what a German division might fire in a month. The sheer scale of production, combined with the casual waste of materials, discarded oil drums, broken machinery scrapped rather than repaired, revealed a society so wealthy and resource-rich that efficiency sometimes became secondary to abundance. Gertner, observing this, began internalizing a profound psychological reality. In America, human ingenuity, labor, and capital were harnessed not just for survival, but for thriving, even amidst war. Letters from Germany heightened this dissonance. Gertner's mother wrote on scraps of paper with pencil, detailing the family's struggle for survival, while his father's brewery lay in ruins due to Allied bombing. Cities lacked electricity, water, and food. Young men and old men were conscripted into final desperate defense efforts. Meanwhile, Gertner watched American society function at full capacity, demonstrating productivity, order, and compassion simultaneously, a duality that challenged everything he had known. The news of D-Day, June 6, 1944, arrived at the camp via newspaper extras. Prisoners read accounts of 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, and 150,000 men storming Normandy beaches. The organizational scale left Gertner awestruck. German forces, he realized, were simply outmatched in logistics, coordination, and industrial support. Letters from home describing desperate civilian conditions only reinforced the contrast between the world he had left behind and the one unfolding before him. By autumn, the psychological weight of observation deepened. Even the most fanatical Nazi prisoners grew quiet as they compared the systematic efficiency and abundance of America with the suffering back home. April 1945 brought another jarring revelation: films from liberated concentration camps. Initially disbelieving, prisoners could no longer deny the atrocities committed in their name. Gertner watched Afrika Korps veterans weep as the reality of their regime's crimes became undeniable. The U.S. Army reported a 400% increase in psychiatric cases in the weeks following the screenings. For Gertner, the duality was overwhelming. Here he saw both human compassion and cruelty. Prisoners treated with dignity while civilians in Germany starved, war prosecuted with precision and care for human life on one side, barbarity unleashed on the other. The seeds of doubt, empathy, and a reevaluation of loyalty took root, setting the stage for his eventual fateful decision. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe had ended, but for German prisoners in America, the sense of relief was mixed with fear. Victory had brought surrender, but surrender did not guarantee safety. For Gertner and tens of thousands of prisoners from territories now under Soviet control, the end of hostilities meant a different kind of peril: forced repatriation to lands where their very survival was uncertain. News filtered slowly through the camps. Orders detailed systematic repatriation, and for prisoners like Gertner, the plan read like a death sentence. The U.S. government announced that all prisoners would be returned to their exact places of origin, regardless of current political control. For 35,000 men from regions now occupied by the Soviet Union or handed over to Poland, including Gertner's home of Schwidnitz in Lower Silesia, this was almost certain death or deportation to labor camps in Siberia. Letters from recently repatriated prisoners confirmed the worst fears. Those sent back to Soviet authority faced immediate screening by the NKVD, suspicion as American collaborators, and a high likelihood of execution or imprisonment. Gertner received confirmation in August 1945. Schwidnitz had been transferred to Polish administration. His hometown, once familiar and safe, no longer existed as he knew it. German families were being expelled, homes seized, and survivors relocated under harsh conditions. For men who had endured captivity in America, the contrast could not have been starker. Here, they lived in comfort and safety. Back home, they faced starvation, exile, or execution. It was during this period that Gertner's administrative role in Camp Hearn became a critical advantage. Access to repatriation schedules, train timetables, and administrative procedures allowed him to study the system as one might study a military operation. He memorized guard rotations, assessed security routines, and calculated escape windows with methodical precision. Every detail, from the timing of evening counts to the positioning of the perimeter gates, was noted and analyzed. He began to prepare not only physically, but psychologically. Gertner perfected an alternate identity, Peter Peterson, a Norwegian immigrant who had lost his papers. He practiced accents, memorized backstory details, and accumulated cash, 80 cents daily from prisoner wages, so that he would have financial independence once outside the camp. Every observation and preparation reflected a soldier's discipline applied to the art of survival. By September 21, 1945, all conditions aligned. A Western film, San Antonio, drew massive attendance, leaving minimal guards on duty. A new moon provided darkness, and Gertner had amassed $25 in cash, enough for basic survival and passage to freedom. At precisely 8:30 p.m., as gunfire erupted on screen, he slipped out of the recreation hall, moving in a low crouch across the sand-swept courtyard. The inner and outer fences awaited, each a physical and symbolic barrier between captivity and liberty. Gertner moved with calculated urgency, timing every step to the rhythm of the distant train whistle. His heart pounded as he sprinted across 200 yards of open desert, knowing that the moving freight train beyond the camp's perimeter was his only path to safety. At 15 miles per hour, the train was both his lifeline and his greatest risk. With a combination of agility, timing, and sheer determination, he hauled himself aboard a boxcar, collapsing inside as the wheels clattered over the desert. The pursuit sirens never came. By 10 p.m., the train was 30 miles west, carrying him toward El Paso and a freedom previously unimaginable. The psychological liberation was immediate. Gertner, who had endured the rigors of the Africa Corps, the privations of North African desert warfare, and the complex bureaucracy of American POW camps, now faced an uncertain future filled with possibility. Yet in that moment, as the desert night receded behind him, he understood something profound. He was running not merely from captivity, but from history itself, the fate of a homeland that no longer existed and a regime whose collapse was inevitable. Dawn broke over El Paso on September 22, 1945, painting the desert sky in pale gold and orange. Gertner, exhausted yet exhilarated, disembarked from the freight train and made his way to the El Paso YMCA. There, he rented a modest room for 50 cents, blending in with travelers, laborers, and displaced persons who filled the building. The desk clerk, a veteran missing his left arm, scrutinized him carefully, but offered no comment. A small mercy that affirmed Gertner's initial steps into a world where vigilance had to be constant, yet discretion could save a life. The YMCA reading room offered a glimpse into the intensity of the search. Newspapers reported military police combing trains, bus stations, and local roads for an escaped German prisoner. A $50 reward was offered for information, and the FBI had been notified. Awareness of these forces sharpened Gertner's focus. He could not linger in one place. Every encounter, every casual observation could reveal him. Survival depended not on physical strength alone, but on blending seamlessly into a society whose scale and efficiency he had already come to admire. Gertner's strategy drew upon the vast inequalities and diversity of post-war America. Rather than risk exposure on public transportation, he joined a group of Mexican migrant laborers waiting for farm trucks bound for the cotton fields outside Las Cruces. No questions were asked, no papers were required. Here, in the fields, the laborers' anonymity and shared hard work offered perfect cover. The cadence of daily labor, from sunrise to sunset, mirrored the discipline of his military training, while simultaneously erasing the traces of his previous identity. Life among the migrant workers revealed another facet of American abundance. Wages of $3 per day exceeded what a German laborer might earn in a week, and meals, though simple, provided protein, bread, and fruits unheard of in the hunger-stricken towns he had left behind. Traveling stores sold canned goods, cigarettes, and cold Coca-Cola. Radios, guitars, and small luxuries were commonplace even among the lowest-paid workers. This society, vibrant and resilient, reinforced what Gertner had already begun to understand. America's abundance extended even to its marginalized populations. Gertner honed his cover story meticulously. Peter Peterson, the Norwegian immigrant, had drifted into agricultural work after losing his papers in a California boarding house fire. Fellow laborers, many undocumented themselves, accepted the narrative without question. Months passed, each day strengthening the veneer of his new identity. By January 1946, Gertner had saved $200, enough to risk moving further west toward California, the land of opportunity and anonymity. The journey to Fresno was taken under the cloak of night to avoid checkpoints, a careful navigation of risk that became second nature. In California's Central Valley, he found work at the Jacomazzi Ranch outside Hanford. The owner, a second-generation Italian-American, paid fair wages and provided housing, asking no questions about the origins of his workers. Gertner observed the continuity of American labor and enterprise. Immigrants, refugees, and local workers alike contributed to a thriving agricultural ecosystem that contrasted starkly with the devastation he had witnessed in Europe. At Jacomazzi's ranch, Gertner further solidified his identity. Among Italians, Mexicans, and other displaced workers, Peter Peterson was ordinary, unremarkable, and invisible. A perfect cloak. The anonymity allowed him to study American customs, work ethic, and culture firsthand, deepening his understanding of a society that thrived through organization, labor, and opportunity rather than conquest and coercion. He witnessed resilience, ingenuity, and camaraderie, realizing that the lessons learned in captivity, discipline, observation, adaptability, could now be applied to construct a completely new life. By the summer of 1946, Gertner realized that mere survival as Peter Peterson was no longer enough. The FBI still circulated wanted posters, and the increasing movement of Norwegian Americans returning from liberated Europe threatened to expose his ruse. To secure a permanent future in America, he needed a new identity, one so complete it could withstand scrutiny from authorities and neighbors alike. Thus, Dennis F. Wilds was born. The reinvention required meticulous planning. Gertner adopted a backstory as an orphan from Arkansas, a plausible narrative that explained the absence of family records. He forged the documentation necessary to establish a legal existence: birth certificate, social security card, and driver's license. Each step was executed with precision, drawing upon the same discipline that had guided his military service and escape planning. Within months, Dennis F. Wilds existed on paper as definitively as he did in reality, a man whose past was carefully erased. The Central Valley of California offered fertile ground for this new life. Gertner found work at the Jacomazzi Ranch outside Hanford, where his skills and reliability earned trust. The agricultural setting, combined with a community of diverse, transient workers, provided a natural camouflage. Here, the routines of planting, harvesting, and tending livestock mirrored the orderliness of military operations, giving him both purpose and protection. The psychological burden of reinvention was immense. Gertner knew his parents had survived the expulsion from Silesia, living in a refugee camp outside Frankfurt, yet he could not risk contacting them. To intervene would risk exposure and potentially undo the life he had painstakingly built. Instead, he maintained the illusion of death, convincing himself that absence equaled protection for his family. This emotional sacrifice, the severing of ties to his homeland, parents, and past life, was the hidden cost of survival. In the winters of 1946-1947, Gertner's alpine skiing skills provided a new opportunity. By moving to California's Sierra Nevada mountains, he gained employment as a ski instructor at Sugar Bowl near Lake Tahoe. Here, he taught wealthy Americans, earning a salary plus tips that exceeded anything he could have imagined during his years in Germany, or even as a POW in America. The contrast between his current life and the devastation of post-war Europe weighed heavily. Letters through the Red Cross continued to reveal his family's hardships, yet contact remained impossible. It was during this period that Gertner met Mary Patterson, a ski enthusiast from a wealthy San Francisco family. Their relationship blossomed over shared runs down pristine slopes, representing a tentative step into normalcy and human connection. For Gertner, the bond with Mary symbolized more than romance. It was a bridge between his reconstructed identity and a society he had only recently learned to navigate and understand. Gertner's mastery of duality became apparent. He was simultaneously Dennis F. Wild's ski instructor and respected community member, and Gayorg Gertner, fugitive survivor and observer of history. Each day required careful management of interactions, speech, and mannerisms to maintain the integrity of his constructed persona. The meticulousness of his former military training merged seamlessly with the demands of daily deception, allowing him to live undetected, even as the shadow of his past loomed persistently. January 13th, 1952, began like any other winter day in Northern California, but it would mark a turning point in Dennis F. Wild's life. A luxury Southern Pacific train carrying 226 passengers became stranded in a blizzard at Yuba Pass, trapped amid snowdrifts and treacherous winds. The situation quickly escalated into a rescue operation that demanded both courage and practical knowledge of harsh terrain. For Gertner, whose experiences as a sergeant in the Africa Corps had honed survival skills under extreme conditions, the challenge was familiar in principle, if not in environment. Gertner volunteered to assist immediately, drawing upon his skiing expertise and endurance to navigate the deep snow. Each step was a careful calculation. Every slope held the potential for hidden ice. Every wind gust threatened to disorient. He guided stranded civilians down perilous paths to safety, coordinating with other rescue teams to prevent further accidents. His leadership was quiet but decisive, a style cultivated during years of military operations where lives depended on the ability to assess risk and act swiftly. Photographers from Life magazine captured the event, and a striking image of Dennis Wild's aiding passengers circulated nationwide. Ironically, the photograph appeared alongside FBI wanted posters seeking the escaped German prisoner. Yet the gaunt, battle-hardened soldier of 1943 bore little resemblance to the confident, composed ski instructor. The photograph became a symbol of his successful assimilation and the irony of his life in America, a fugitive celebrated for heroism, yet still hiding from his true identity. The Yuba Pass rescue solidified Gertner's local reputation, creating a delicate tension between recognition and secrecy. While neighbors and community members admired Dennis Wild's bravery, no one suspected the man's extraordinary past. Each act of heroism was both a shield and a risk, proof of competence and character, yet a reminder that exposure could come from the most unexpected source. Gertner's careful observation of human behavior, refined through both war and captivity, allowed him to navigate this precarious balance. Beyond personal safety, the rescue reinforced a deeper understanding of American society. The community's reliance on coordinated efforts, volunteerism, and local resources reflected the democratic ideals he had witnessed in camp and during his travels across the United States. Unlike the rigid hierarchies of military command or the scarcity-driven society he had fled in Germany, here ordinary citizens collaborated seamlessly to overcome adversity. The experience deepened Gertner's appreciation for the values that had motivated his escape and shaped his new life. In the following years, Gertner continued to integrate into Californian society, leveraging his athletic abilities and social skills to secure steady employment in sports instruction. He earned sufficient income to move to warmer climates, ultimately settling in La Jolla, California. Tennis became a new avenue for both professional engagement and social camouflage. Here, he interacted with actors, executives, and affluent clients, all while maintaining the meticulously constructed persona of Dennis F. Wilds. Despite the outward success, the psychological burden of secrecy persisted. Each interaction carried the latent risk of discovery, and each personal connection deepened the complexity of living a life built on concealment. Gertner's ability to navigate this duality, the public hero and the hidden fugitive, demonstrated remarkable adaptability, a skill rooted in decades of observing, planning, and surviving under extreme conditions. By the mid-1950s, Dennis F. Wilds had established himself as a respected tennis instructor in La Jolla, California. The transition from alpine skiing to tennis was not just a career change, but a strategic adaptation. Tennis offered the dual benefits of social integration and financial independence, allowing Gertner to cultivate a lifestyle that blended stability with discretion. He taught actors, executives, and members of exclusive clubs, earning $500 per month, a comfortable living that exceeded the expectations of most German middle-class families struggling in post-war Europe. Gertner's military discipline and methodical mindset extended naturally into his work. Observing the limitations of wooden tennis rackets, he envisioned improvements that could enhance both performance and durability. Drawing on his understanding of materials and mechanics, he developed an aluminum frame design, lighter and stronger than traditional wood. This innovation foreshadowed a revolution in the sport, although Gertner could not patent the design without risking exposure of his true identity. The idea, though uncredited, would later inspire commercial successes by others, quietly cementing his influence on the game. His life as Dennis Wilds was a careful balancing act between anonymity and visibility. Publicly, he was the skilled instructor, admired for patience, precision, and athletic expertise. Privately, he remained acutely aware of the past he had left behind, an escaped POW, a survivor of desert warfare, a witness to the destruction of his homeland. Each day reinforced the duality of his existence, the man America knew and the man the world of 1943 had once known. During this period, Gertner met Jean Clark, a widow with 2 young children. Their relationship developed slowly, grounded in mutual respect and genuine affection rather than immediate passion. Marriage to Jean in 1964 solidified Gertner's new identity. He became a father figure to her children, further embedding himself into the social fabric of his adopted country. The creation of family life provided a psychological anchor, allowing him to reconcile, at least partially, with the emotional sacrifices of his past. Gertner's existence in La Jolla and later Hawaii, where he worked as a construction estimator for military projects, reflected both opportunity and camouflage. Hawaii's multicultural environment, populated by immigrants and military personnel from diverse backgrounds, offered perfect cover for someone with a hidden past. Here, his expertise in logistics and coordination, honed during wartime and POW experiences, proved invaluable. He navigated professional responsibilities and social interactions with the same strategic acumen that had allowed him to survive his escape. Yet, even amid success, the weight of deception persisted. Letters and news from Europe reminded him of a family he could not safely contact. Each personal achievement was intertwined with the quiet acknowledgement of lives affected by his absence. The delicate balance of thriving in freedom while hiding from history became an ongoing psychological challenge, shaping the contours of a life that was, in essence, twice lived. By 1984, the weight of decades spent living a carefully constructed lie had begun to take a toll on Gertner. The constant vigilance required to maintain his Dennis F. Wilds identity, combined with the emotional distance from a family he could not contact, created an ever-present tension. When Jean suggested a European vacation, Gertner realized that the masquerade could no longer be sustained. Obtaining a passport would trigger official scrutiny, potentially unraveling 40 years of careful planning. The moment demanded a confrontation with the truth he had long evaded. On a humid August evening, Gertner disclosed his true identity to Jean. He revealed he was not Dennis Wilds, the orphaned American, but Gayorg Gertner, a German soldier who had escaped American captivity after World War II. The revelation shattered the carefully constructed reality of their life together. Jean's reaction cycled through disbelief, anger, and devastation, emotions that mirrored the gravity of Gertner's confession. 20 years of marriage had been built on deception, and the foundation seemed to crumble instantly. Despite the personal rupture, Gertner's decision to reveal the truth was emblematic of the internal reconciliation he had long delayed. He was no longer merely surviving. He sought acknowledgement of the life he had forged in exile, the duality he had maintained, and the historical circumstances that had necessitated his flight. The confession allowed him to reconcile the two lives he had led, the fugitive who fled war and persecution, and the citizen who embraced the opportunity, freedom, and abundance of post-war America. Following the confession, Gertner and Jean separated, though they remained legally married, due to the impossibility of documenting a divorce without revealing his true past to authorities. The dissolution of their marriage was less an act of rejection than an acknowledgement of the irreconcilable complexities his secret had imposed on family life. Gertner continued to live discreetly, carrying both identities forward, navigating the world with the same precision that had characterized his military and POW experiences. In 1985, through intermediaries, Gertner reached out to historian Arnold Kramer, whose 1979 book on Nazi prisoners of war in America documented 7 unaccounted-for escapees, including Gertner. They negotiated a way for him to tell his story publicly without facing legal consequences. On September 11, 1985, exactly 40 years after his daring escape from Camp Deming, Gertner appeared on NBC's Today Show. Bryant Gumbel interviewed him as millions watched, the last German POW unaccounted for finally ending 4 decades of flight. The government's response reflected bureaucratic confusion rather than retribution. The FBI declined to prosecute a 65-year-old man for a 40-year-old escape. The Immigration and Naturalization Service struggled to classify his status. He was neither a conventional illegal immigrant nor deportable, as Germany, his homeland, no longer existed in the form he had left it. This unusual legal limbo underscored the extraordinary circumstances of his life and highlighted how history, law, and personal survival intersected in unpredictable ways. After his public surrender in 1985, Gertner's legal situation remained unresolved for several years. Special legislation in 1990 finally granted him permanent resident status in the United States, resolving the immediate uncertainty but not fully closing the chapter of his complex identity. It would take until November 2009, 24 years later, for him to obtain American citizenship at the age of 88 in Denver, Colorado. These milestones represented more than bureaucratic achievements. They symbolized the final institutional acknowledgement of the life he had carefully built as Dennis F. Wilds. In Colorado, Gertner lived quietly in Loveland, embracing a rhythm of life that contrasted sharply with the constant vigilance required during his years in California and Hawaii. While he occasionally granted interviews, he remained private, reflecting thoughtfully on the forces that had shaped his decisions and the moral ambiguities of living a dual life. He expressed profound gratitude for American generosity, tempered by regret over the necessity of deception. Parents, siblings, and communities in Germany had endured uncertainty and mourning because of his absence, a personal cost that weighed heavily even amid his comfortable life. Gertner's life illustrated a profound duality. One existence as a German soldier serving a criminal regime, and another as an American citizen embodying opportunity, freedom, and reinvention. The escape that began as a desperate bid for survival evolved into a broader journey of adaptation, cultural assimilation, and personal transformation. He had not merely fled captivity, he had redefined himself within a society that offered abundance, safety, and a chance to forge an entirely new identity. Throughout these years, Gertner also reflected on the broader historical context of his experience. His life exemplified the psychological impact of American captivity for German POWs. The exposure to abundance, democratic values, and organizational efficiency contrasted sharply with the devastation and scarcity in post-war Germany. These experiences, shared by only a fraction of POWs, created inadvertent ambassadors of democratic ideals and economic reconstruction when many returned to Germany. Dennis Wilde's Gayorg Gertner spent his remaining years in Colorado, quietly observing the nation that had allowed him to escape not only imprisonment, but history itself. His dual identity, maintained for more than 6 decades, became both a testament to human resilience and a reflection of the transformative power of societal generosity. Through his life, Gertner embodied the capacity to adapt, survive, and thrive under circumstances few could imagine, leaving behind a legacy that merged personal ingenuity with historical forces beyond any single individual's control. In 2012, at the age of 92, Gayorg Gertner returned to Germany for the first time since his escape nearly 7 decades earlier. The visit was a private journey, intended not for publicity but for personal reconciliation with the land of his birth. Visiting his sister in Hamburg, Gertner confronted a country profoundly transformed. The ruins and scarcity he had known during and after the war had given way to a prosperous modern nation. Streets were clean, infrastructure efficient, and everyday life bore no trace of the hunger and fear that had once defined his childhood and military service. The contrast was striking. Gertner remembered his hometown of Schwidnitz, now under Polish administration, where German families had been expelled, and survival had been a daily struggle. The country he returned to was unrecognizable, yet the psychological weight of memory remained. For Gertner, witnessing the modern Germany of 2012 crystallized the gravity of his decision to remain in America. He had fled not merely for material comfort, but to avoid returning to a homeland that had been transformed by war, occupation, and political upheaval, one where survival was uncertain and old loyalties had dissolved under new regimes. The visit also served as a quiet reckoning with the past. Memories of comrades, lost friends, and the brutal desert campaigns of North Africa resurfaced. The military precision, scarcity, and constant threat of death during his years in the Wehrmacht and the Afrika Korps contrasted sharply with the abundance and order he had experienced in American camps. Even as Germany had rebuilt and flourished, the echoes of war and its moral complexities remained etched in his consciousness. Gertner's reflections underscored the broader historical forces that shaped his life. The transformation of Germany, the opportunities provided by America, and the fate of the 425,000 Axis POWs held by the United States illustrated the interplay of individual agency and structural history. For Gertner, his escape, reinvention, and eventual return symbolized both personal survival and the unintended consequences of a nation's humanitarian approach to former enemies. He witnessed firsthand how exposure to democratic values, organizational efficiency, and abundance could redefine perspectives and lives, creating a bridge between former adversaries and new possibilities. On January 30th, 2013, Gayorg Gertner passed away peacefully in Loveland, Colorado, at the age of 93. His death certificate listed both names, Gayorg Gertner and Dennis F. Wildes, acknowledging the dual identity he had carried for more than 6 decades. The record reflected not only a personal history of escape and reinvention, but also the complex intersection of war, survival, and adaptation in a rapidly changing world. Gertner's life spanned 2 remarkably different worlds. One existence was rooted in the militarized, hierarchical, and morally compromised environment of Nazi Germany, where duty, ideology, and survival intertwined in ways that often demanded devastating choices. The other existence was lived in the United States, a society characterized by abundance, opportunity, and democratic institutions, where he could reconstruct his identity and embrace freedoms unimaginable in his homeland. The contrast between these lives underscored the profound psychological and social consequences of war, exile, and cultural immersion. His story illuminates the broader historical significance of German POW experiences in America. Of the 425,171 Axis prisoners held in U.S. camps, only 2,222 attempted escape, a mere 0.52%. Witnessing American abundance while knowing Germany's devastation created a psychological tension that few could endure, and Gertner's escape exemplifies the extremity of that choice. Many POWs returned to Germany as inadvertent ambassadors for democracy, carrying lessons learned from exposure to American organizational efficiency, technological advances, and civic values. Yet for Gertner and a handful of others, the contrast proved too stark, compelling a permanent break from the homeland they had once served. The American approach to POW management, providing humane treatment, education, and meaningful labor, demonstrated the soft power of democratic principles. By offering dignity and opportunity, the United States transformed former enemies into witnesses and, in many cases, allies. Gertner's life exemplifies this transformation, showing how exposure to abundance and civic values can create profound personal and societal change. Though his gravestone bears no mention of his extraordinary history, Gertner's story endures as a testament to resilience, adaptability, and the capacity for human reinvention. His escape was not merely physical, it was psychological, social, and moral, a deliberate flight from a destroyed past into a future he could shape. In living two complete lives, Gertner demonstrated the enduring power of choice and circumstance in the shaping of individual destiny against the backdrop of history's largest conflicts. The story of Gayorg Gertner cannot be fully understood without examining the broader context of American prisoner of war policies during World War II. The United States held 371,683 German POWs in camps across the country, and the overwhelming majority, 95%, rated their treatment as good or excellent. This was no accident. The U.S. military recognized that humane treatment was both a moral obligation under the Geneva Conventions and a strategic tool. Well-treated prisoners were less likely to resist, more likely to cooperate, and in the long term could become inadvertent emissaries of democratic values upon returning home. The contrast with the Soviet Union could not have been starker. Of the roughly 3 million German POWs captured by the USSR, approximately 1 million perished in captivity, many subjected to forced labor under brutal conditions. Survivors were not released until 1955, a decade after the war's end. American camps, by contrast, became inadvertent showcases of industrial capacity, civic organization, and social abundance. Prisoners witnessed, firsthand, the material and moral infrastructure of a nation at war yet thriving. An education in democracy delivered through daily experience rather than ideology. For many prisoners, the lessons learned in America influenced post-war reconstruction. They returned to Germany, having seen the functioning of a society that operated through voluntary compliance, civic responsibility, and institutional efficiency, rather than coercion and propaganda. These POWs often became quiet agents of change, contributing to the rebuilding of the Federal Republic along democratic and economic principles. Yet not all could reconcile the disparities. For a small number, including Gertner and linguist Kurt Rossel, the contrast between post-war devastation in Germany and abundance in America proved psychologically insurmountable. Their choice to remain in the United States reflected both the pull of opportunity and the push of trauma, illustrating how exposure to vastly different social and economic realities can shape life decisions in profound ways. Gertner's experience underscores the unintended consequences of wartime policies. By treating enemies with dignity and providing education, labor opportunities, and basic abundance, America transformed its POW population not only into compliant captives but also into witnesses of an alternative social order. The soft power exercised in these camps had enduring effects, creating a bridge between former enemies and the post-war democratic world order. Gayorg Gertner's life exemplifies the transformative power of freedom and abundance on human behavior and decision-making. His escape was motivated not merely by survival, but by a profound desire to embrace a life that offered dignity, security, and opportunity. Things he knew could never exist under the shadow of Soviet-occupied Silesia or the ruins of post-war Germany. Witnessing America's wealth, technological prowess, and social mobility created a cognitive dissonance so stark that returning home became psychologically equivalent to choosing death or enslavement. The camps themselves were microcosms of this transformation. POWs lived better than German civilians, received abundant food, participated in education, and experienced a society organized for efficiency and human flourishing. Exposure to this system reshaped perceptions of what life could be, undermining Nazi ideology and planting seeds for democratic engagement. Letters, diaries, and personal accounts reveal that many former prisoners internalized these lessons, influencing post-war German society's reconstruction. Gertner's reinvention as Dennis F. Wilde's highlights the personal dimension of this transformation. By adopting a new identity, he exercised agency in constructing a life free from the moral, political, and material constraints of his former world. His decades-long concealment of his true identity reflects the complex interplay of guilt, pragmatism, and aspiration, illustrating how historical forces intersect with individual choices to create entirely new trajectories. The broader historical lesson is profound. American treatment of POWs became a model of soft power. It demonstrated that humane, organized, and abundant treatment of former enemies could create loyalty, admiration, and eventual integration. Unlike the Soviet camps, where brutality fostered resentment and long-term hostility, the U.S. approach converted adversaries into allies, witnesses, and in some cases immigrants who contributed to American society. In the end, Gertner's life demonstrates how exposure to abundance, education, and freedom can catalyze profound psychological and social transformation. His story underscores the capacity of nations to wield influence not only through force, but through values enacted in everyday life. By the time of his death, he had lived two complete lives, one bound by duty and ideology in the Wehrmacht, and another defined by freedom, innovation, and personal reinvention in America. His journey remains a testament to the enduring impact of moral, economic, and political choices on both individual destinies and historical outcomes.